Hi, I'm Brandon Neely with the Civil War Institute, and today I'd like to talk about a monument here at Gettysburg to soldiers who weren't even at the battle. Today I'm standing along Cemetery Ridge at the 84th Pennsylvania Infantry Monument. To my left is the Pennsylvania State Monument, and ahead of me is the stone wall which now marks the Union line during the second and third days of the Battle of Gettysburg. During the battle, this location was the site of tremendous fighting as Union troops repelled the rebel troops of Pickett's charge. Throughout the fighting, the area was peppered by musketry and bombarded by artillery fire. If you were standing here where the monument is, the scene would have been absolutely terrifying. The smoke of musket fire would have left an awful stench, combined with the shrieks and cries of thousands of wounded men. At this spot, looking west toward the Confederate line, you can almost picture the massive movements of infantry across these open fields, marching towards the men of the 84th Pennsylvania, ready to defend their position. There's one issue, though, that's kind of important, which is that the 84th Pennsylvania Infantry Regiment wasn't here during the charge. In fact, they weren't here during the battle. Not on Cemetery Hill, not on Little Round Top, not even in Gettysburg. Instead, they were about 20 miles away in Maryland. So why weren't they here during the battle? And since they weren't here, why is their monument? Answering both of these questions teaches us about how the Civil War was conducted, and even more about how it was memorialized. To answer the first question, we can use the monument itself. The inscription behind me reads, July 1, the regiment was on duty guarding the division wagon trains, moved with the column on the road from Taneytown to Emmitsburg, and on the opening of the battle was ordered with the train to Westminster, where it arrived July 2nd at 7 a.m., and picketed the roads near the wagon parks until the close of the battle. This inscription is historically accurate. The 84th Pennsylvania had been part of the Army of the Potomac's fighting force since October 1861. Coming off of heavy engagements at the battles of Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, the Union Army was marching quickly to intercept the Confederate invasion of Pennsylvania. Their march did not just include thousands of men, but also hundreds of mule or horse-drawn wagons bearing supplies such as food, ammunition, and other war material. Generally, about 25 wagons were needed to supply 1,000 men. So with over 100,000 Union soldiers present for duty at the battle, historians reasonably estimate that at least 2,500 wagons were in use. When we consider what Civil War marches looked like, we picture long columns of men, but the wagon trains were hugely important as well. For context, Union General William Sherman's Atlanta campaign used around 5,000 wagons in a line nearly 60 miles long, according to research by the Cleveland Civil War Roundtable. In the aftermath of the Battle of Gettysburg, the Confederate Army transported their wounded in a wagon train 17 miles long. Wagon trains were major parts of a Civil War battle and were absolutely necessary for armies to carry out warfare. This being said, the men of the 84th Pennsylvania were not pleased to be assigned wagon duty on the night of June 30th, the day before the battle. Stopping in Taneytown, Pennsylvania with the rest of the army, the regiment's leader, Colonel Milton Opp, made a special request to his commanding officer that the assignment be changed, but he was denied. Thus, as the bloodiest battle of the Civil War began, the brave warriors of the 84th were guarding a long line of wagons, moving to safety in faraway Maryland. As historian Chris Gwynn writes, perhaps the sound of battle reverberated that far, or perhaps an occasional gust of wind carried the scent of burned powder. If so, this would have been the 84th's only sensory participation in the battle. The men would not be alone. At least 19 other regiments also guarded the wagon trains during the 3 days of battle. But we have to imagine that their hearts and minds were on the other members of their brigade, who were in fierce combat near where we stand now. After the battle, they would rejoin these men and continue to serve honorably at battles including the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Petersburg. By the end of the war, 750 of the total 1,310 soldiers enlisted in the regiment would be killed, wounded, captured, or missing, over 50%. Of these, 230 would lose their lives. And so, as the nation attempted to rebuild itself and move forward, the men of the 84th Pennsylvania Infantry Regiment were aware of their active role in American history and began to shape how their involvement in the war would be remembered. Their efforts culminated in the gorgeous monument behind me. But why? As we answer this second question, we get an understanding of how Gettysburg transformed from a small town ravaged by war into a military park covered with monuments. The significance of the battle here was no secret to the citizens of Gettysburg. Within months, the people of the town were involved in the purchase of land to preserve and the creation of the National Cemetery to bury and remember the dead. In 1864, the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association was created, which dedicated itself to the transformation of Gettysburg into a preserved memorial space. Gettysburg Chief of Interpretation and Education Chris Gwynn describes that the original plan for Gettysburg was a place where the Union cause and the Union victory are really celebrated. Gettysburg became a place where regiments like the 84th Pennsylvania could mark, in stone, their participation in the battle for the survival of the nation. These monuments were not simply about marking where people stood on a given day. Instead, they gave a physical marker of the fact that those people were there for a reason, and that their presence in the story at all was meaningful. And so, when the survivors of the 84th Pennsylvania determined where they wanted their participation in the war to be memorialized, there was one clear option: Gettysburg. As the regiment's Captain Merchant described, leaving his men off of the battlefield would have left the regiment unrecorded to the world as of any army up to and including the time of Gettysburg. As you know, though, there was one small issue. Groups placing monuments on the battlefield were required to place them near where that group had been during the battle. So for most regiments, this was just a matter of choosing what position they had fought at best and what was the most important to remember. But for the 84th, this meant that there was no option at Gettysburg. But the men were aware of this complication and fought to persuade the Memorial Association for the right to place it somewhere here in Gettysburg. They argued the point that without their wagon trains and their guards, the Union effort would have been impossible. In the words of Captain Merchant, without them, even Gettysburg would not have been a field of monuments. To send the point home, they reminded the association that they had asked to be relieved of guard duty and given the opportunity to fight. Finally, the very man who assigned them wagon duty, Brigadier General Joseph Carr, wrote a letter publicly endorsing a monument to the 84th. As he described, to deprive this regiment of the recognition it is entitled to upon that memorable battlefield would, in my opinion, be a very great injustice. It was also General Carr who resolved the issue of where this monument would be placed, writing, "I would respectfully suggest that the monument be erected at a point near where my headquarters were previous to the second day's engagement." With this recommendation, the monument was approved. On August 10, 1889, the remaining men of the 84th gathered to dedicate the gorgeous memorial behind me. In the dedication, Captain Merchant articulated its importance clearly. To the living it is, and to the people yet to come it will be, the visible proof of the deeds of heroism which located a part of the life of the men who bore the names that make the roll of a command. The regiment would be remembered not just for its service at Gettysburg, but for their deeds throughout the war. A list of the battles they were involved in is inscribed on the back, providing an account of their years of service. After all their hardship, the men would be remembered. The timing of this dedication is important to consider as well. As this monument was being placed on the Gettysburg battlefield, a wave of Confederate monuments in Gettysburg and elsewhere were being erected. Not only was the erection of this monument a battle within Union supporting communities, it also illuminates the sectional conflicts about the political appropriateness of monuments and memorialization occurring here in Gettysburg. Speaking on behalf of the 84th Pennsylvania, Captain Merchant made the argument that the inclusion of Confederate monuments was detrimental to national reconciliation. As he argued, there can be no true call for a union of the blue and the gray. Let all don the blue. As in heaven, so on earth, to dwell together as brothers, all must be of one mind, patriots, upholding the one flag, standing fast by the red, white, and blue. He also argued that the government's strong arm should have swept from its soil the first monument to rebellion, with the warning that the placing of the second would be known as treason. By insisting on a monument to his own absent regiment at Gettysburg while decrying the placement of monuments to the enemy, Merchant was hoping to add his own regiment's voice to the true meaning and memory of the battle, and stake, in literal stone, his personal claim to the political righteousness of the Union cause. It is imperative that we recognize the multifaceted significance of a monument at Gettysburg. As we know, it was the prime location to make your mark on American history and memory. But for the 84th, it was also a continued battlefield for the story of the nation. The monument to the 84th Pennsylvania is one of my favorites. The fact that such a gorgeous memorial, complete with absolutely arbitrary flank markers, exists at one of the central locations of the battlefield never fails to give me a chuckle. But it's far more than a cool piece of trivia. It's a reminder of the less popular aspects of the war, and the fact that to fight a battle you have to feed, arm, and transport its combatants. It teaches us about why, how, and where these men chose to be memorialized. It's a massive symbol that these men not only participated in the American story, but wanted to shape it. Finally, it's an artifact of the continued struggle to interpret and remember the Civil War. And although I'm biased, I think it might be the best monument on the battlefield because it's one that teaches us so much. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you learned something today, it helps us out immensely to like, share, and comment on these videos. I'm Brandon Neely with the Civil War Institute, and thank you for watching.